Hello everyone, we're back with the 2020 quilt and today we are talking about block 12. So we've moved on from our flying geese and angled rectangle series, and today we're going to be working with some different sizes that we haven't worked with yet. So this block is made up of two half square triangles, but they're larger than what you've worked with in the past. So you're going to be starting with 5-inch squares instead of those 3-inch squares. So you get to make a much bigger half square triangle this time. Then we're also be going, instead of doing an angled rectangle, we're going to be doing an angled square. So same process, we're just going to be cutting off the corner of a square. However, this one, we're going to be dealing with a 2.5-inch square here, and our square that we're going to sew diagonally on to angle this corner is going to be a 1-inch square. So we're going to be working with bigger pieces and smaller pieces. So this one will be a little bit of a test for you. Your accuracy is going to be really important when you deal with this tiny little square to make that triangle corner. The other thing is, when you're dealing with smaller pieces, you want to make sure that you have enough contrast that once you do all this work, you can see it. So in this block, you can tell that my background and my setting, or my two half square triangle fabrics, they're kind of similar, so that the contrast wasn't as great as I was hoping it would be. But what's really important is to make sure that whatever fabric you pick for this has enough contrast. And I'm going to show you my other blocks now so you can see some of the difference. So this was my block from my 12 fat quarters. And again, I have definitely enough color contrast, and they're all a little more solid. So again, it's easier to see the difference between the colors when you don't have a lot of movement in your pattern going on. This was the first one I made. And I was just thinking, oh, I'll do something in Christmas colors. So, I picked the red and the green. Obviously, I have enough contrast out here. And I decided to do my little corners with a black. But as you can see, because my green has quite a bit of black in it, you kind of tend to lose these little corners if it got too close to the black in my green. You can still see them, but it's not as clear as when I had highly contrasting colors. Or here, my dark red was a high contrast, you see that? But my two backgrounds over here tended to blend together a little bit. So for my demonstration today, when I decided to pick my fabrics, the first thing I wanted to pick was let me grab my block. I wanted to figure out, what do I want my little bow ties here to be, okay? Because that's kind of the focus point of this block. So I decided to go with this kind of nice dark steel blue. Then I wanted to figure out are these blocks going to be set against, because that will help give me the best contrast. And I was just going through my scrap bin, and I found this little print. It's actually snowflakes, but it's got the silver and gold going on in it, so I thought my blue went well with my silver tones. And then next, I decided I needed to figure out what this highly contrast color is going to be. And I decided to go with a gold. So I have a lighter background, which will be here. My 2.5-inch squares are going to be of the blue. They'll create my bow tie, and then my little centers are going to be this gold. Then the last thing I needed to do is figure out what this here outside corner was going to be. And I had two choices. So these were the two that I picked out of my stash. And when I put them next to, because again, these two are going to be working together, when I put these two fabric next to this one, which is the ones that will be touching, this one blended together too much for me. This was a better contrast. It pulled in some of those darker brown colors, a little bit of the gold. So I decided to go with this. So these are the 4 fabrics that I chose to create this block. So again, when you're picking your fabric for this block, especially whichever one you pick for here, you really have to make sure that you have enough contrast to see all the little work you're going to be doing. So again, for this one, you get to cut 5-inch squares. And like I said in the past, I like to cut my squares in half first and then sew them into half square triangles. But if you prefer the method where you draw the line and stitch on either side, you can do that. So these are going to be real easy to make. They're bigger squares. You're just going to create your half square triangles, and you're going to be squaring them up to the 4.5-inch block. So when they're finished, you're going to have that. Okay? Now we're going to talk about making these little 4 patches with our little corners chopped off. So for these, you're going to be needing, so you'll need 8 squares that are your light, 4 squares that are your light, 4 squares that are your dark, and then you'll need 8 of these tiny little 1-inch squares. And I didn't get my line drawn on the back. You're going to draw a line on the back of each one of them. Okay. Now, one of the most important things is when the smaller the piece, the more accurate your sewing has to be. So when I'm sewing these, if I put this on here, and actually I'm going to draw a line on there first. You want to try to find a marking pen that's going to give you a really fine line, okay? You don't want to have a whole lot of variables when you're working with this. So then I'm going to take, and it really doesn't matter which corner you put it on, and I want to lay it on there, and I need to make sure that this is lined up really well, okay? And I need to stitch corner to corner. You want to slow your machine down a little bit to make sure that it's not wobbling. It's not a very long seam, so you want to take your time. You want to go slow. Depending upon the stitch length on your machine, whatever the default is when you turn it on, you may want to make your stitch length a little bit shorter just so you get a few more little stitches going across that small seam. And then the other thing I want to talk about today is your thread. You want to make sure that you have a really fine thread. I'm going to put it on this dark so you can see it a little better. So this is the Quilters Select 60 weight cotton thread. It's one of my favorite for piecing. The thicker the thread, the more it can actually distort when you go to turn or iron those little corners over on top of each other. So I use this Quilters Select 60 weight for almost all of my piecing. It just gives me, I think, the most accurate when I'm ironing, because when I sew my little corner on, and when I go to iron this over, the heavier the thread is along that seam, the more fabric I need to actually flip over that thread. And when I'm working with teeny tiny pieces, I want to have the least resistance to go over that thread, so the finer the thread, the better it will be. And again, it's making sure that you're super accurate, hitting right on that corner and ending right on that corner. And then once I iron them open, I want to make sure that everything is lined up straight. You'll know immediately if you got off, if your corner's kind of going off to an angle like that. You can also, you're going to press it really well, and then if you flip it around to the back, you'll be able to tell, because this blue square I know was cut accurately. So I can do any trimming I need to according to the size of the blue square if my little gold one was off a little bit. If it's off a lot, you're better off to take out this tiny little seam and re-sew it. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling later to put them together. So once I have them ironed, and I've double checked to make sure everything is square, then I can come and cut off these back 2 pieces. So I'm gonna cut them off even a little bit shorter than that standard 1/4 inch. I want as small a seam as I can get, shorter than that standard 1/4 inch. I want as small a seam as I can get. And then I don't want to press, when you iron them, they're all pressed this way. So when I've ironed and clipped them off, I clip this a little shorter than I normally do. But if I leave them this way, I'm going to have a lot of bulk right where all of those four meet up when I try to sew them together. Okay, and yet to iron it, trying to iron one of them this way when that seam is so little and this square is so little, it gets a little difficult. So I like to, on something small like this, I like to iron my seams open so that I'm splitting it halfway. So when I go to join them, it just is easier to do. And again, I have a little tool here that it's actually for when I'm doing English paper piecing. It's called a finger stiletto. And it just kind of gives you a little extension off of your finger, so when you're ironing, you can use this. So if my finger here was the iron, I can use this little stiletto to open up this seam so I don't have to get my fingers so close to my iron and accidentally burn my fingers. So it's just a nice little tool for any time you need to hold something in place while you're ironing it. So this is something we have at the shop called the finger stiletto. So once I have my pieces sewn on, I have them trimmed, I have my seams ironed open. Now I need to put my little squares together. And again, I'm going to be joining two of each color, opposite colors. So I'm going to be making a set like this, two of them. So when I put my pieces together after I have them ironed open, where I really want to focus my attention is getting the point where these two gold ones to match those up. Okay, so I want to focus on that, and even if my ends aren't meeting perfectly over here, where your eye is going to look on this block is at that center point. So your eye is always going to go to where these little points are intersecting. Okay, so I'd rather have to fudge on this outside edge and keep these points nice and tight and even. So as I put it together, I'm going to focus on that. Then I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam along there. So I'm going to end up with two sets. Again, that go like this. And then I'll just sew those two sets together. So eventually I'll end up with my block that's like this. And again, just kind of really focusing on that little point where the gold meets. So then once I have my two blocks like this made, and this one I'm just going to lay out, and I want to put it together, I want it to focus on my blue ones, which are my little bow tie blocks. So this one would be sewn together, this one's sewn together, and then I'm going to have my half square triangles. This color will go to the middle. This will be my outside color. That one will go to the middle. So I'll sew these two together, sew these two units together, and then one seam down the middle. So again, this is just going to be that really working hard to get that accurate seam going corner to corner and focusing on pinning and hitting those little points when you sew those little pieces together. So we're doing bigger pieces and littler pieces. I hope you enjoy it. Have fun. Bye.